Now, there's a lot of talk about Joe Joyce's chin. People saying that he's got a granite jaw and they don't think anybody can knock him out and he's just going to walk everybody down and this, that, and the other. Well, some of you, I'm sure, know, but not all of you, that Joe Joyce was actually stopped a number of times in the amateurs. Now, if you're talking about a guy like, let's say, David Tua, who fought in the Olympics when he was, I think, 17 or 18, and he got knocked out by Felix Savon. That same David Tua, as a man, because he was really just a boy, 17, 18, as a man, he had one of the best chins in the heavyweight division. You're still developing physically. Even your skeleton and bone density and muscular, all kinds of physical changes can happen between the ages of 17 up until, when you're in your 20s and what have you, maybe even into your 30s. So I didn't read too much into Tua getting knocked out by Felix Savon in the amateurs. And again, he proved to have a good chin in the pros. But when Joe Joyce was stopped in the amateurs, he was well into his 20s. In fact, he was in his late 20s. So I'm going to go through it here. Now, obviously, we've seen in the pros and in some of his amateur bouts, Joe Joyce take good shots. So I'm not sitting here telling you that Joyce doesn't have a good chin. He's got a good chin. But does he have a George Chuvalo chin? Does he have an Oliver McCall chin? Not from what I've seen. So as you can see here, in 2012, he was stopped in one round by Anthony Joshua. Okay. Now, apparently he was stopped on his feet in that fight, and that can happen because if you get overwhelmed, you get a few standing counts and then the referee's going to stop the fight. In a pro fight, that wouldn't necessarily have been a knockout. Maybe you would have been able to ride the storm, and because you hadn't been down, so on and so forth. But either way, he was stopped early against Anthony Joshua. Years later, in 2013, right, a couple years later, he was stopped in one round by Sergey Kuzmin. Now that fight, and this is after, by the way, beating Filip Hrgovic in the, he beat, of course, he fought Usyk, lost to Usyk, but he beat Filip Hrgovic in the WSB, World Series of Boxing. A bunch of other people there. But yeah, in 2013, he was stopped in one round by Sergey Kuzmin. And you can watch that fight on YouTube. Kuzmin comes out swinging like a madman, and he catches Joe Joyce with big shots, and down Joyce goes, heavy. Now, Joyce doesn't appear to be out of it when he gets clipped by Kuzmin and goes down. He appears lucid. He doesn't look like he's on rubbery legs when he gets up or anything like that. Excuse me. But the knockdown was so heavy that the referee and amateur boxing referees tend to jump in a lot quicker than in professional boxing. And the referee was like, "No, this is too much. You're getting hit with all kind of big shots immediately." So that was that, and he lost by TKO in the first round. And it was within seconds of the opening bell. He was on the floor from big shots by Sergey Kuzmin. Again, he got up and he looked all right, but he got dropped. This is back in 2013, right? So this is 9 years ago. Joe Joyce is 37 now. So he would have been about 28 at the time when Kuzmin dropped him within the first few seconds of the bout. Are we saying that his chin is vastly superior now to what it was when he was 28? I find that hard to believe, to be honest with you. I can't see how he would have changed that much physically to make so much of a difference to his punch resistance. So he was also stopped that same year, also in one round, by a guy called Hamza, is it Begwerni? And that's how I'm going to pronounce it. And that looks like the Kazakhstan flag. I think that's Kazakhstan flag. So he was stopped again in the same year in one round. There is no footage of that as far as I'm aware. But again, Joe Joyce being stopped early. And those are the three occasions that I'm aware of where he didn't last the distance in the amateur code. They were all early stoppages. So I'm not of the mindset that Joyce could just go in there and take anybody's power. I think there are lots of guys out there that could hurt him, that could drop him. Yes, he might be more difficult to drop than most other heavyweights, but I don't see him even having a chin like, let's say, Marius Wack, who Wack is well into his 40s now, I think, and he's only just been dropped for the first time ever in his last fight, I believe it was. So, yeah, I don't think that Joyce's chin is even as good as Marius Wack. Marius Wack, for the longest time, had a ridiculous chin. I mean, you go watch the Klitschko fight. Klitschko hits this guy with the very same right hands he was hitting Anthony Joshua with. And he's hitting Marius Wack with him for 12 rounds. And Marius Wack ain't going down. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Even in the Povetkin fight, right? He did get stopped in the 12th round against Povetkin, but he never went down. It was close to going down. So for me, Wack has got the best chin I've seen in the heavyweight division for a very long time, maybe since McCall. I don't think Joyce's chin is on that level. And I think Joyce knows that his chin is not on that level. That's why even against Joseph Parker, he didn't come out like a steam train from the opening bell. He was cautious in the first couple rounds, was using his jab. Once he figured out the angles and once he figured out Parker's moves, he started letting go with more shots. And also, once Parker cracked him clean a few times, I think at that stage, Joyce was like, I'm not impressed. You know what I mean? He didn't really think much of Parker's power. And that was like a red rag to a bull. That's when Joyce really upped the pressure and started sticking it on Joseph Parker. But against Daniel Dubois, you didn't see Joe Joyce stick it on Dubois like that, because he felt some of Dubois' shots and he was like, okay, I don't really want to take those. People say I've got an iron jaw, but Dubois' hands are heavy. I don't want to put myself at risk, so I'm just going to stick at the end of this jab. I'm not really going to apply that much pressure. And that's how that fight went. If Joe Joyce allows this iron chin thing to get to his head and he starts believing it, then he's going to put himself in serious danger. Hopefully he doesn't. Hopefully he takes the sensible approach, as we saw in the early rounds against Parker, as we saw in the whole fight against Daniel Dubois. And if he does adopt that more sensible approach using his educated jab, then I think he can give a lot of people problems. I can see from a skill perspective how he beats Wilder. Previously I would have thought that Wilder will knock Joyce out. Joyce is too open and too slow. But when you really think about it, when you look at what he did against Parker, setting everything up behind the jab, and one thing Joyce did, I'm sure some of you noticed this, is when he was backing Parker into a corner or towards the ropes, Joyce would step to his right very often, okay? Because he's conscious of the right hand coming from Parker. So if Joyce is stepping to his left or he's just coming in straight, he could walk into a right hand. So he would step to his right so that Parker's got to reach more with his right hand in order to land it. Now, he did get clipped a few times. He didn't remember to do that every time, but there were many times in the fight where he did do that. He would step to his right while he was backing Parker up to the ropes. So against someone like Deontay Wilder, Joe Joyce, as slow as he is, he's got the better boxing skills. He could stick Wilder on a jab. He could do something similar to Wilder, to what Tyson Fury did in the third fight. I think he could do something similar to that. Stick him on a jab, tire him out because Wilder's throwing all these wild shots. I mean, a lot would depend, of course, on what weight Wilder comes in at. If Wilder's coming in at close to 240 like he did for the Fury Trilogy fight, he's going to gas out quick. But if he is back to the old Wilder, who was like 215, 220, that version of Wilder has got much better stamina than the version we've seen more recently. And so I think that would be a more dangerous fight for Joyce. But if it's the heavier Wilder with the poor stamina, I can see Joyce beating that guy. Obviously, Wilder's got that kind of power where if he catches Joyce clean on the chin, I'm not expecting it to just bounce off Joyce's chin. I'm expecting Joyce to be hurt or to even go down if he gets clipped like that. But it will be up to him to try and control Wilder with the jab, tire him out, and then once he's tired, he can carefully go in there and start applying the pressure, wearing him down, hitting him in the body, roughing him up. We saw Tyson Fury do that. Joe Joyce, I'm going to imagine, I don't know this because I haven't seen the two guys in the ring, but I'm going to imagine that Joe Joyce is actually physically stronger than Tyson Fury. Fury's a strong man, but I suspect Joe Joyce is actually stronger. So you look at Joyce's weight for the, got the amateur record up here. Go to his pro record if this thing will actually load. Taking a second. Yeah, here we go. So he was 271 against Joseph Parker. That's a similar weight to what Tyson Fury's been for example, the Deontay Wilder fights. But you look at Joyce at 271 compared to Fury. Fury looks like, 275 pounds of chewed bubblegum. Whereas Joyce looks solid at 271. And he's not one of these guys who's a bodybuilder type. This is natural bulk that he's got on him. So I suspect Joyce is physically stronger than Tyson Fury. He might be the strongest heavyweight in the division right now, or at least one of the very top 2-3 strongest heavyweights just in terms of physical strength. There is a difference between physical strength and punching power. And in fact, let me come on to that, because Joyce is often compared to George Foreman because of his biomechanics. And there is a lot of similarity there in terms of the way he moves to a young George Foreman. But he isn't the devastating puncher that George Foreman was. I know Foreman was a lot smaller than Joyce. Foreman was like 6'4", never more than low 220s in his prime. So by today's standards, George Foreman would be a small heavyweight. But if you watch Foreman's fights, like when he fought Ken Norton and all these other guys, for his size, he appeared to punch harder than Joyce. I mean, I don't know who would hit harder if you had a punching machine, a young George Foreman at 224 and Joyce at 270. Maybe Joyce would hit harder. I don't know. But for his size, right, pound for pound, Foreman appeared to be a more vicious, harder puncher than Joyce. Joyce is more of a accumulation guy. He wears you down over a number of rounds, whereas Foreman would just take people out. And I'm talking about top level people. When he fought Joe Frazier, just took him out. Ken Norton took him out, etc., etc. So yeah, that's one of the differences with Joyce is he doesn't quite have that. He's got power, obviously, he's a heavy-handed guy, but it's not that vicious, devastating knockout artist type power that the young George Foreman had. So that's one of the differences. But again, he does have that fitness, he does have that work rate, which a young George Foreman didn't really have. He got rope-a-dope by Ali and gassed out and got knocked out in the 8th. So yeah, Joyce, I think, is a handful for most fighters. I'd be very interested to see him fight Tyson Fury. I know Fury is very dismissive of Joyce and says that he would hit Joyce 10 times before Joyce hit him once. I'm not convinced by that. I'm not convinced. I think Tyson Fury probably would beat Joyce, but I don't think that's an easy fight, to be honest. And the more I see of Joyce, the more difficult I think it would be for Tyson Fury to beat him. I've seen so many people say that Fury is virtually invincible now, and him and Usyk are head and shoulders above everybody. It feels like Groundhog Day, because a couple years ago, when Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury were all unbeaten, the general consensus among boxing fans was that nobody is beating AJ Wilder or Fury other than themselves. So they might be able to swap wins and losses between each other, but nobody outside of that trio is going to beat any of them. This was the consensus among boxing fans. But then, of course, Andy Ruiz happened, and that changed things. Okay? But then it was down to two, Wilder and Fury. Obviously, Wilder's fans getting behind him, Fury's fans getting behind him, and then another consensus emerged that, okay, it's between Fury and Wilder now. Out of those two, they might be able to beat each other possibly, but nobody outside of that duo can compete with them. And then, of course, Deontay Wilder got knocked out by Fury, and he hasn't been beaten by anybody else yet, but he doesn't have the same level of support. People don't believe in him as much as they used to because of the nature of his last 2 fights against Tyson Fury. And then, of course, Usyk emerges on the scene, beats Anthony Joshua, gives him his second loss. And now people are saying, well, it's between Fury and Usyk. Nobody can touch these guys. They might be able to beat each other, but nobody outside of that duo can beat them. It's like Groundhog Day. One thing I've learned over the years about boxing, but particularly heavyweight boxing, is that it is never as stable as you think it is. It's very rarely as stable. Let me not say never, but it's very rarely as stable as the general consensus seems to indicate. In heavyweight boxing, these enormous guys are throwing massive punches in little 10-ounce gloves, and it only takes a split-second lapse in concentration for a title to change hands. You know? So it's a numbers game. If you go in there and you literally take on every contender and every champion out there, you're going to lose. Unless you're in a really, really weak era, which this era isn't, by the way. I know there's some people who will try and tell you that it is, but no. Think about it. Tyson Fury, if he's so head and shoulders above everybody, and there's nobody other than Usyk that can compete with him, explain to me why this guy has been dropped. How many times in his career? I think 5 times or 6 times. I think he's been dropped 6 times in his career. And 2 of those times were in the fight before last. And the guy who dropped him last, in Deontay Wilder, he's not the most skillful heavyweight out there. He's not the most accurate fighter. He's not the most subtle. He isn't the craftiest at setting up his punches. And that guy dropped Tyson Fury just 2 fights ago. Of course, earlier on in Fury's career, he was dropped by Nevin Pikage, a fighter who never went anywhere, and Steve Cunningham, a cruiserweight who was at the end of his career. I'm sorry, people, but someone who's been dropped 6 times and recently twice in one fight, he's not invincible. This is the heavyweight division. You think Wilder's the only guy that can drop Fury? Have you forgotten about Nevin Pikage and Steve Cunningham? Go and have a look at the Otto Wallin fight. Yeah, Tyson Fury wins the fight, but it's not straightforward, is it? He doesn't get Otto Wallin out of there. It doesn't come close to getting him out of there. Gets badly cut in that fight, and the cut is not from a headbutt. It's from a punch. Why is Otto Wallin landing them kind of punches on Tyson Fury if he's so head and shoulders above everybody and nobody can compete? I'm telling you, the heavyweight division is nowhere near as stable as people think it is. It's always been my view that nobody in this era, I've been saying this for years, is going to dominate and beat everybody. Fury won't do it. I was saying this when all these guys were unbeaten. AJ won't do it. Fury won't do it. Wilder won't do it. The only person who I think stands more of a chance of doing it is Alexander Usyk, because he's going straight for the big fights. He's not dilly-dallying around. He doesn't really seem interested in anything else other than fighting Fury, maybe Wilder, and then calling it a day. So maybe there's the chance that he escapes without getting beat. But if Alexander Usyk was to fight all of the top fighters, let's say the top 10 fighters in the world, top 15 fighters, I don't see any way that he gets out of that without taking a loss. I just don't see it. And not necessarily to Fury either. And the same for Tyson Fury. If he goes out there and fights everybody, let's say over the next 2 years, 24 months, if he fights all the top fighters out there, the Michael Hunters, AJs, Hrgovic, Jared Anderson, Andy Ruiz, if he fights literally everybody, Usyk, of course, if he fights everybody, in my mind, there is absolutely no way that Tyson Fury is going to remain undefeated. No way. There's too many different styles. There's too many people with power. Fury's vulnerable himself, not just in terms of the fact that he can be dropped. He's got great recovery powers, of course, but he can be dropped. Also, the fact he's getting hit. Think about that. People really gloss over this thing with regards to Tyson Fury. Deontay Wilder is not a very skilled fighter, compared to the elite guys. But he's catching Tyson Fury and he's putting him down. I mean, this is what Malik Scott was talking about with regards to the AJ Fury fight potentially happening. He was saying, look, I can't have that much confidence in Fury because he's getting caught a lot. This is a guy supposed to be head and shoulders above everybody. Why is he getting caught this much? Do you know what I mean? And that's definitely in my head. So I think Fury is cognizant of the fact that he is vulnerable. And that's why he doesn't want to just go out there and fight every single person back to back to back. He wants to put the Manuel Charles in there and all these other people, the Schwartzes and the Wallins, so he doesn't have to fight every single contender, all the most dangerous contenders. He wants to take certain calculated risks, fighting the Wilders and maybe Usyk and maybe AJ, we'll see. But in between that, he doesn't want to take on the Hrgoviches and all the other dangerous contenders. He doesn't want to do that. You know what I mean? Unless they're mandated like Dillian Whyte, he doesn't want to do it. He wants to minimize the risk and only really take risk in the huge, big money fights where he thinks, perhaps in the case of AJ, he's taking it at the right time when AJ's vulnerable. So, yeah, that's my take on what Tyson Fury is doing, the heavyweight division in general. And, of course, I forgot to mention Joe Joyce, right? He's in that mix with regards to if Usyk is to fight everybody, if Fury is to fight everybody. I think Joe Joyce gives both of those guys a real tough fight. And specifically with Tyson Fury, I think Joe Joyce's jab would give Fury a lot of problems. Joe Joyce has fast feet. So we know Tyson Fury has got the faster hands than Joyce. He's much more fluid and what have you. But Joyce's feet are fast. And he's got a good jab. And when he holds his hands high and he's sticking his jab on you, and he doesn't just jab to your head. So Fury can move his head. We know that. He's got good upper body movement. But Joyce will jab your chest. He'll jab your body. And he'll angle himself in such a way that it's difficult to catch him when he's jabbing you to the chest and to the body. And he's physically strong. So I think it's a very interesting fight between Joyce and Fury. I would pick Fury still. Just, being a bit more experienced at the top level as a pro and being very slippery and what have you. Maybe just getting some shots in and walking Joyce onto a few. But I see Joyce giving him, particularly with that jab, a tough time. And as the fight progresses, a 275-pound Fury, he's not as mobile as Tyson Fury at 250. Do you know what I mean? Maybe you will come in lighter against Joyce. I don't know. But if we're seeing the version of Fury who fought Dillian Whyte, who was a bit lighter, I think it was like 265, or the version who fought Wilder the past two times, who was in the 270s, late in the fight, when Joyce is getting his engine rolling, what's Tyson Fury going to look like late in the fight? Do you know what I mean? Like, is he going to be just as sprightly as Joyce? Is Joyce going to be able to put some late pressure on Fury and, manhandle him a little bit and hurt him late in the fight? I think it's an interesting one. It's definitely one I would like to see. Bob Arum, of course, was talking about Tyson Fury fighting Joe Joyce. I think originally they were saying the back end of this year. Now, it's unlikely that's going to happen because Joyce has just fought and it was a pretty, taxing contest against Joseph Parker. At a push, I guess he could get out again on December 3rd, but he's probably going to want a bit of a rest. These are the kind of guys who Tyson Fury should be fighting. If he's saying he's the greatest heavyweight of all time, you need to be taking on the Joe Joyces. It's an in-house fight. It's easy enough to make, right? So Joyce doesn't have to wait or push Alexander Usyk for a shot, because Usyk is obviously going to have other people to defend against, like Hrgovic, who's the IBF mandatory and what have you. There you go. You can give Joe Joyce a voluntary. Allow him to have a voluntary crack, or I should say, have a voluntary defense against Joyce. That's a better way to word it. A credible opponent. Let's see what Tyson Fury does. Let's see what Joe Joyce does next. They're looking to put Joyce out early next year, I guess in kind of a tick-over fight, because it's unlikely to be Usyk, because perhaps Fury will be fighting Usyk, or Usyk will be fighting somebody else before then. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below about Joe Joyce, his chin, his power, how you assess him as a fighter, who you think he'd do good against. I personally think he matches up pretty well against everyone. I think the most dangerous fight for Joyce would be Wilder because of that fast, explosive power. I would expect Joyce to outbox him, but if he gets cracked the way he did against Joseph Parker, I'm not sure his chin's going to save him against Deontay Wilder's power. And maybe the same against Anthony Joshua. If Joshua can really hit Joyce hard and fast early, he might be able to do what he did in the amateurs and get him out early. Because Joe Joyce can be a bit of a slow starter. Maybe he gets caught cold in fights, like in the amateurs, because he's slower than most other guys. They come out winging, overwhelming him with punches. Maybe that's the way you fight him. Maybe you shouldn't allow Joe Joyce to get into his rhythm. You should go in there and bombard him early, maybe, if you're a puncher. So, anyway, lots to talk about. and discuss. Let me know what you think in the comments.